How did a fluid band of 14th-century pastoral nomads become a rigid, world-dominating sedentary empire by 1453? For most of the 20th century, historians looked to Paul Wittek's Gaza Thesis to explain this transformation. Wittek argued that early Ottoman expansion was fueled by a strict, orthodox Islamic holy war directed against Christians. This model established the standard understanding of Middle Eastern state-building for decades, providing a coherent origin story for the empire. But historian Rudi Paul Lindner presents a counterargument that challenges Wittek's model. Lindner argues that Wittek incorrectly applied later, orthodox imperial ideologies to an early period shaped by the shifting needs of the frontier. This ideological mirage has obscured the inclusive mechanics that built the Ottoman state. To find the drivers of Ottoman expansion, Lindner discards religious texts and applies a strict anthropological lens to the early state. He begins with pastoral nomadism, a fragile economic system dependent on moving livestock to seasonal grazing lands. A pastoral nomadic tribe functions through shared economic success and military capability, prioritizing survival over strict bloodlines or a shared religion. A successful tribal leader operates by drawing in disparate groups, integrating them to increase the tribe's overall strength. This network illustrates how tribal affiliation remained fluid. Anyone who contributed to the tribe's success was absorbed into the kinship network. This inherent tribal inclusivism contrasts with the religious exclusivism required by Wittek's holy war model. In Lindner's view, the tribal structure required radical inclusivism as a fundamental survival strategy. If the early state was so inclusive, the written records from the period don't show it. The first Ottoman chronicles, such as those by Ahmedi, appeared nearly a century after the empire's foundation. This timeline highlights a significant delay between the tribal actions on the ground and the later documentation of those actions. The men writing these chronicles were employed by later sultans who needed literature to legitimize their rule. This process created a retroactive orthodoxy. Later historians overwrote a pragmatic, inclusive history with a strict religious narrative to please their monarchs. Paul Wittek accepted these later texts at face value, without accounting for the context of their creation. Trusting the written sources without analyzing the timeline of their production results in a religiously pure origin story that never took place. Stripping away the biased texts reveals the physical and geographic reality of Anatolia in the early 1300s. The primary daily concern for early Ottoman pastoralists was securing access to water and seasonal grazing rights. Moving thousands of people and their livestock across the harsh Anatolian terrain to survive was a massive logistical challenge. This constant movement necessitated continuous negotiation, trade, and cooperation with settled Christian towns. The geographic necessity of moving herds created a blended economic zone rather than a hard political border. Mutual economic benefit along these paths resulted in non-Muslims being integrated into the nomadic political structure. Lindner highlights specific historical evidence, such as the absorption of Byzantine Christian lords, including Köse Mihal, directly into Osman's inner circle. To the early Ottomans, a local Christian ally with tactical knowledge was more valuable than a distant Muslim scholar. The physical and economic survival of the tribe on the Anatolian frontier overrode any ideological or religious boundaries. This flexibility was deeply embedded in their frontier culture. Lindner details widespread evidence of heterodoxy, including the retention of pre-Islamic shamanistic rituals among the tribesmen. The tribe also elevated Bektashi dervishes, mystics who focused on spiritual fluidity and local adaptation over strict Islamic jurisprudence. Frequent intermarriages between early Ottoman elites and Byzantine Christian nobility served as a standard political tool for state building. These pervasive cultural practices show the early state functioned as a blended frontier society, making Wittek's strict Gaza Thesis incompatible with the evidence. By the late 1300s, the Ottoman tribe began capturing major walled cities. Governing a city requires sedentarization. Leadership must stop moving, build a bureaucracy, and exact rigid taxes. This sudden transition to a strict urban administration fundamentally broke the fluid tribal pact that originally built the early state. The new sedentary sultans alienated the pastoral nomads who had powered their expansion. This economic and cultural betrayal triggered tribal rebellions, forcing the sedentary state to adopt the Gaza myth to legitimize their rule. The Ottoman state transformed into an orthodox Islamic war machine to meet a specific political need. On the left, Lindner's early tribal phase, fluid and shifting. On the right, Wittek's later imperial state, a rigid pyramid. 15th century chronicles obscured this fluid past to match the rigid imperial structure. This propaganda veil led historians to misread the empire's origins. Lindner's work forces modern scholars to stop reading history backward and to trust anthropology over state-sponsored chronicles. Ottoman expansion was the product of a pragmatic, adaptable, and inclusive nomadic society, rather than the ideological exclusion described in the later chronicles.